Hey, good morning, everyone. I hope you all are doing well today. It is Friday, October 31st, 2025. So, today we're going to talk about a topic that may be a little too much for some people, but I think it's extremely important that we talk about it and that we actually get into the details about what is the potential outcome of it. So, the topic I want to talk about today is the end of the United States as we know it, or American collapse, American decline, however you want to put it. So, as we know, in the recent decade, 2 decades, if you really want to look that far back, we've had some pretty significant issues, you could say, in terms of not only the political landscape, but the social, the economic landscape, military, and international relations scale. And all of this has put itself together and combined, it is significantly impacting the future of what we can call the American Empire. So, if we go back to 1950, for example, a few years after the end of World War II, the United States was what you could call peak peak empowerment in a sense. So the United States really controlled the world in that sense. I mean, it rivaled with the Soviet Union. So they were like the two big powers. But the United States, economically and militarily, was clearly superior. The only thing that really, you could say, pushed the Soviet Union to rival it was not only their nuclear arsenal, but also the significant population of the Soviet Union, which could also reinforce the Soviet military. And of course, the Soviet military with several active soldiers. So, in that sense, of course, the United States, which also had similar acolytes in its bag. I mean, it also had a large military, several million soldiers, whether that was in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. It also had a nuclear arsenal that it right on top rivaled the Soviet Union, and both of these two powers had outrivaled their former predecessors, which was the British Empire, the Nazi Germany, the French Empire, and now these two nations, the United States and the Soviet Union, were on top. And it almost seemed as nothing could take down either of those nations, especially the United States. And here we go today, 2025, so now we're 75 years later, and it's completely flipped upside down. And not to mention just the Soviet Union, but also, primarily, we're talking about the United States here. The United States has completely shifted in terms of what we saw in 1950 versus what we see today. So in 1950, you have a very strong manufacturing base, a growing economy, growing population, growing middle class. The United States seemed like it was perfect. They just came out of World War II. They won probably what you could call the biggest conflict in human history. And it almost seemed like the United States was unstoppable. There's nothing that could ever take it down. And it had been the richest country, and if you want to call it an empire, the richest empire in human history. The United States was unstoppable, and it overthrew its allies, and it clearly was superior in its own ways to the Soviet Union. But of course, as time would go on, that the cracks would start to show in the United States, and throughout the 50s and 60s, the United States still remained in its peak. It was, as a life in the United States was as good as it could get. But of course, with Vietnam, that would eventually come, and then in 1971, with the dollar being taken away from the link with gold by Nixon, the United States economy, the United States military prestige would start to slowly evaporate over time. And you could argue that the only thing that really saved the United States dollar and the economy was the link to using the United States dollar as the petrodollar. Um, but that's just on the grand international scale and in regard to the United States currency. But if we're really talking about social fabric of American society, what was going on inside the country, it was slowly disintegrating from within. While the outside may have looked nice, within is where the breakdown started. So when the manufacturing base in the United States started to decline in the late 1870s, 1980s to the 1990s, you started to have severe poverty within many of these American cities. Again, the manufacturing decline, the population decline, more people moving to the suburbs, more poverty within the cities. If you take a look at cities like, for example, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Columbus, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York. I mean, these cities were in their heyday in 1950, but by 1980, they slowly started to disintegrate. And at this point, now, while, again, at home, we may have had these problems with social cohesion, poverty. I mean, the similarities, it was much more worse in places like, of course, the Soviet Union, where, communism was clearly collapsing from within itself. And, despite the problems that the United States had, it seemed that despite all of the issues at home, things weren't as bad as they were in the communist countries, which to an extent can be true, but, it's really not the point of it. The point is that this is where the United States started to unwind and unravel from being at its peak, which I would say about between 1950 and 1960, where it was like peak power, peak economically, where the United States middle class actually flourished and was functioning, and then it started to decline when the Vietnam War came in throughout the 70s, 80s, and etc. And I'm not saying that the United States actually was, in a fast decline. It was a very slow decline. But the United States still appeared on the international stage to be this hegemon, and that it was unrivaled. And of course, when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, and then of course afterwards you will have the Clinton years, you did the Bush years, Afghanistan, Iraq. That's really where you could say the last period. So I would say that the later years of the Clinton period, first years of the Bush era, up to like 9/11 was really when the United States started speeding up in terms of decline. So when we see that the United States ran this budget surplus in the last years of Clinton's administration, to where we are today with the $1.9 trillion deficit, and where we are today with the national debt over $38 trillion, it begs the question, are we going to be able to come back from that? Or are we going to continue to unravel further? And that's really where we are right now. So, yes, will the United States collapse? I'm sure this is the question everyone wants to get to. I know I'm not trying to do a history lesson and bore everybody out here, but let's get to the point. Is the United States looking at collapse, where it's apocalyptic, like you'll see in a movie? Do we just see something like maybe some social unrest where the United States breaks down, but it still remains a functioning government, and the structure of the United States continues on? Do we see possibly the divisions, maybe certain states, certain areas breaking away? There's many different, possibilities and hypothetical scenarios that we can actually look at. But I'm going to give you what I think, and what I personally think is that, at least into the near future, the United States, the way it looks today, will continue. This is like a 5-year outlook. So the United States, I feel, will continue in the way it is, but it's going to continue to decline. when you look at the decline of empires, for example, the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, British Empire, the French Empire, and even benign empires like Germany in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire. All of these empires, they rose, they reached a peak, and they declined slowly until they declined fast all at once and collapsed. And of course, when we look at some of these empires in the past, we're not getting into a tangent here, but when we look at some of these empires in the past, like, for example, France, the French Empire, the British Empire, Britain and France are still functioning nations today, but they lost all of the prestige, they lost their power, they lost most of their economic wealth, and they lost their empire. So, of course, it doesn't mean the United States will completely collapse. It's not going to be an apocalypse, but it definitely means that the United States may not be what we recognize it as today in 20, 30 years from now. So we kind of have to come to terms with that. And of course, when we look at countries like India or China, whose economies are growing, will eventually surpass. Well, the United States has already been surpassed, depending how you look at it, by China. But India eventually, according to PwC, India eventually will surpass the United States' economy. So, of course, when we look at these things, you have to understand that the economies, or you can call the old world economies, the United States is slowly getting there. The old world economies, Germany, Britain, Japan, France, these economies, they're not going to go anywhere. It's not like they're going to completely disappear. They'll still be here. They'll still be rivals in 2050. They'll still be top contenders. But they will be replaced, and they will be at the bottom tier, where countries such as Brazil or India are today. And they will be replaced by those countries, and in Indonesia, for example. So, I think it's really important that we actually come to terms that our country is declining, and it is not going to be the same power that it was 20 years ago in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And yes, I don't see an apocalyptic event coming, to answer the question. I know I can get into a tangent, but I don't see an apocalyptic event. I do not see the United States completely dissolving and, everyone going out and, stealing and killing each other and doing all this crazy stuff. I don't see that completely, because I still believe that there will be some sort of functioning government, at least going into the future. But again, because of this administration now, because of administrations the past administration, the administrations on both ends of the political aisle are more and more, they're becoming more and more, I would say, authoritarian. And even the Democratic side as well, because they're less and less, they're not really catering to the needs of the constituents anymore. It's more or less like, yeah, I'll tell you what you want to hear. You vote me in, I get into power, and now we're going to do what we want. We don't care about what you wanted, you guys wanted. You voted us in. You were the fools. You were the suckers that voted us in. Now we're going to do what we want. This Biden administration did the same thing the Trump administration is doing. The Biden administration told people, especially young Americans, we're going to forgive student loan debt. We're going to secure the country. We're going to stop COVID. We're going to revitalize the economy. They didn't do any of that. Trump administration, same thing. Going to bring back America, bring manufacturing back. We're going to protect Americans. They've done nothing like that. They become more authoritarian. Instead of actually following through and chasing down criminals, they're deporting innocent people. And whether or not you can have your opinions all you want on whether or not you believe in immigration or illegal immigration, whatever it is, you made a promise to the American people to help out individuals in this country, and you've done the exact opposite. You are hurting families. You're ripping Americans apart. You are instilling fear within the population in both sides, especially right now with the government shutdown, and now we have the looming food crisis with the SNAP benefits. This is the work of both parties. This is the work of an incompetent, corrupt government, and again, our government has fallen so far from what they used to be 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, especially under like the beginning of the Obama administration. They've fallen so far. It's increasingly getting worse and worse and worse. More political polarization. There's absolutely no bipartisan workaround. Nobody's working together. It's us versus them. Screw you, screw you. I don't care. We don't want to work together. The American people are suffering. There's tens of millions of Americans living in poverty. And children are suffering without food. Homelessness is as bad as it's ever been. The liabilities that the United States has in terms of Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, the military, for infrastructure, it's going unfunded because they do not have the money. They have to continue to borrow. Again, as I mentioned previously, with the national debt and the deficit, it's completely out of control. Not a single politician is sitting down and saying, we need to solve this. At this point, I don't think without, extreme austerity measures, that this couldn't even be resolved. Cutting people's Social Security and Medicaid and cutting small amounts of money here and there in government departments is not going to solve the crisis. But again, neither is taxing the rich, because the problem is, without actually forcing these companies to not leave the country, it's going to be very difficult. If you take a rich person's salary, if they're paying 20% taxes, for example, and you go and say you're going to be paying 80% taxes, now they'll just pack up and leave the country. That's not going to help us, because now they're not going to pay anything. And it could be the same thing for the business. The business could pack up. Of course, the United States is always going to be the world's largest consumer market for the time being, and all the businesses, in the world want to continue to invest in the United States and actually make money here. Forcing a business to pay exorbitant taxes is only going to cause that business to end up raising prices and putting Americans under more and more pressure. So, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. And, the government, unfortunately, has put us in this place. And, just continuing spending with a budget deficit, an exorbitant budget deficit, is what led us here. And, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan, the endless wars have put us also, have also contributed to that. But, government incompetence, corruption, lack of oversight, it's all contributed to this and put us in this position where we are today. And when we see these politicians that say they're going to bring America back from the dead, it's not going to happen. And the middle class is dying. It's not fully dead yet, but it is dying, and I don't see any chance of bringing that back. I'm not here to fearmonger. I'm not here to, put out conspiracy theories. It's not what it is. It's just simply the truth. You need to be told the truth, because the politicians aren't going to do it. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. And what you want to hear is that the United States is going to come back from the dead, which it will not. So, that's where we are. But, where do we go from here? We already have the United States talking about they want to pull back from Europe. They're not really trying to tend to their NATO responsibilities in Europe, protecting, even here Poland, who is the nation of Poland, they are now concerned that the United States is not going to protect them, so therefore they're investing heavily in their military. While we don't have any obligation to Ukraine, we've already seen the Trump administration not willing to help them. The Trump administration has been helping Israel, but, for how long can the United States continue to help other people when its financial situation is in dire straits and its people are suffering? Again, poverty and massive amounts of debt as well. Let's not forget to mention that. We have credit card debt, student loan debt, mortgage debt, consumer debt. I said credit card debt already, I think. There's car loan debt as well. Sorry, I'm getting a little off track here. But the amount of debt in this economy is absolutely insane. The amount of debt Americans are in. Depending on how you look at it, during COVID versus now, well over 50% of Americans are paycheck to paycheck. I believe at the peak of COVID, it was almost about 75% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, including 1/3 of people that were making over 100,000 a year. If you go to cities like in New York or Miami or Houston or Los Angeles, I mean, your salary is going less and less and less from what it used to go. I mean, you can barely survive making 100,000 a year in New York City, let alone making 50,000 or 30,000. So, how can Americans come back from this? The social, the cohesion that kind of once held us together. Community-oriented Americans that went out and helped one another and built our country. Where do we go from here? Because this is gone. The days, we are individualistic people now. We're no longer, we don't, I'm lucky if I see a community act once a week, let alone ever, especially in this area in Connecticut. Not, the past is gone. We're all out for ourselves now in this country. We have rampant crime, drug abuse, health rate, the life expectancy is declining in our country. Again, government corruption, issues with the law enforcement, police, totalitarianism coming from our government. Where do we go from here? Because this can't, again, political polarization. Both sides are like all over the place. They don't know where they want to go. So where do we go? That's pretty much the end question here. And I know I've kind of tried to get around to this question in the past 20 minutes, but I think there's just a lot of topics that I don't really have the time right now to within this video. This is kind of like it's a short video, so don't really have the time to kind of break down each individual topic, which I will at a later time. But for now, I'm pretty sure you just want to know where we're going to go. And we're not going into a good place. The United States will continue to decline. And until we eventually default on our debt, this government shutdown that we're currently in just continues until eventually federal employees aren't going to get paid, people aren't going to get their SNAP benefits, as two examples, and then we may have mass protests, something you might have seen similar to like during the 2020 George Floyd protests. So, of course, we also are going to just continue down a road of endless poverty and policies at home here that are just going to continue to unravel, or another forever war, as Trump may be instigating, or somewhat. May have a good reason for, but who knows the real truth with Venezuela. And where do we go from here is kind of very difficult because we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in the next hour or 2 hours. So I think that the most important thing for everybody to do right now as an American is to just be prepared. Go about your daily lives, do what you can do to survive, but have a plan. Make sure that your family is safe, that you have an emergency plan, you have supplies put at home, and you are just prepared. Being prepared is the number one thing you can do. And again, if you have, the ability to go out and buy these supplies, or even, if you have a permit and you can own a firearm, whatever you can do to protect your family, but make sure to continue living your life. And don't get involved in the mainstream, craziness. I mean, don't go out there and join extremist groups and go out and loot and burn cars when there's protests. Don't do these things. Protect yourself and your family, your livelihood, your future. Make sure you're safe, because that's all we can do in these times, because things are changing. They're changing fast, and the uncertainty in this country is leading us down a road that we're not coming back from. I'm going to just give it to you straight. We're not coming back from we're not going back to 1950 golden age America with the, you can own a house for $10,000 and you can afford a family can live off of one person's salary. We're gone. Those days are done, and we are going into a world that the United States has never faced before, and a crisis will come. A currency crisis is coming that will rival any other crisis in human history because of how important the U.S. dollar is and how important the U.S. economy is and how large our country is relative to these empires of the past. Our currency is in deep trouble, and it takes one incident, let alone, again, our financial situation here already that is declining at a rapid pace, for this country to unravel. And we are slowly, but we will get there fast. So, again, it was great to, break this down with y'all. And until the next video, everyone stay safe. And again, remember what I said, be prepared. And, make sure you take care of yourselves, take care of your family. And until next time.